Dartmouth Hitchcock Health, we believe these COVID-19 vaccines can change the world. They're a path back to normalcy, shared experiences, laughter, brighter days. The COVID-19 vaccines are safe, effective, and will save lives. So stay strong and get your shot when you can, because in New Hampshire and Vermont, there's hope inside.
Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Marshall, co-founder and executive director of This Is My Brave. It has been such a joy to work with the team at Riverbend Community Mental Health for a third year in a row. We are so grateful to Karen and Rebecca and Ellen for all the time and energy you all have put into organizing this event. Thank you to the storytellers who have come forward to share their personal experiences in living with mental health issues and also addiction. And it's because of you that someday we will live in a world where we don't have to call it brave for talking openly about mental illness and addiction. We'll just call it talking. And that's starting right here tonight, one person and one story at a time. We couldn't be more excited for you all and excited to hear these beautiful stories. So sit back, relax, enjoy the show.
Good evening, and welcome to our third annual production of This Is My Brave, New Hampshire. My name is Lisa Madden, and I am the president and CEO of Riverbend Community Mental Health here in Concord, New Hampshire, and I'm so glad you've joined us this evening. This is also our third year presenting a series of educational events to our community in an effort to highlight the national recognition of May as Mental Health Awareness Month. Some of the other events this month have included remarks from Charlie Olson, an inspiring fifth grader and New Hampshire's Kid Governor, whose platform is raising awareness for children's mental health. A book discussion with Air Force veteran Scott Aubin, author of Not Today. A panel discussion on the mental health impacts of COVID on diverse populations in our community, as well as the option to enroll in mental health first aid training. At Riverbend, we have worked tirelessly to modify our approach to services to ensure the behavioral health needs of our clients and our community are met during these challenging times as a result of COVID-19. We sincerely hope you and your families are well and have found the strength and support to persevere during these difficult times. We've also been actively engaged in many efforts to educate our community about the available resources at Riverbend, as we are aware that the ongoing pandemic has brought to light the mental health needs in people who may have not sought treatment before. In addition, we've responded to those who have been living with mental illness or addiction where the pandemic has contributed to the exacerbation of their symptoms. Helping people cope with the unknown, the heightened stress, or sadly the loss of loved ones has been cornerstone to our work over the past year. Part of that effort has been encouraging people to know that you are not alone. And that's exactly what we hope you get from this event this evening. The stories you will hear are those of hope, resilience, and recovery from mental illness. If you or someone you know is struggling, we hope you leave today feeling inspired and knowing that treatment works and recovery is real. All of this has been possible because of the amazing dedication of our providers and staff. Riverbend is a team of over 400 professionals who demonstrate daily their compassion and commitment to clients, colleagues, and the community. I want to thank all of them for their work. I am honored to be part of this team. Please remember, we all have mental health. It is so important that we nurture and care for our mental health needs, and Riverbend is here to help you take care of yours. Visit us at www.riverbendcmhc.org. Or for more information, if you are ever in crisis, please call our 24/7 crisis hotline number, 1-844-743-5748. That's 1-844-7-HELP-4U. Of course, we couldn't host this event without the generous support of our Mental Health Awareness Month sponsor. I'd like to give a huge shout out and thank you to Dartmouth Hitchcock. They have been a steadfast sponsor of this event, and we are very grateful. We are all in this together, and community sponsors are critical to helping us achieve our mission. Thank you again for tuning in to this evening. We hope you enjoy the show. I'd like to now introduce to the stage New Hampshire Today radio show host, Chris Ryan.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you for your leadership and for all the staff at Riverbend. I'm so appreciative of what you do on a day in, day out basis to help individuals in our community. I'm Chris Ryan, as Lisa mentioned, from WGR in New Hampshire today, and I've had the privilege over the last number of years to get to know so many individuals who have incredibly brave stories. And what you're going to hear tonight are individuals who I have a tremendous amount of admiration for. It is not easy in our society to step forward and bear witness to the raw and very real aspects of our lives. It's one thing to talk, as I have, about how I've coped with anxiety and depression through the course of my life, really since I was 10 years old. And it's another to discuss in real detail the aspects that it has happened as it has affected us in our lives. So I have tremendous admiration for those individuals. I mentioned, ever since I was 10, I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and coping has been figuring out how to make those things work for me while also addressing them in my own way. And I, like many others, I think of Bruce Springsteen, I think of Jaylen Brown, the Celtics, who have stepped forward and said that it's time to have a real conversation. It's not just time to talk, it's time to listen. And I am so appreciative of the individuals speaking today because it gives me the opportunity to listen. And what you're going to hear tonight are individuals who are going to talk about the fact that they, at one point in their lives, were labeled as being different or felt different. The fact of the matter is that we are all different. And that is something to be embraced, not something to be chastised. And once you find and are comfortable with that individuality, that's when your life really begins. When you stop trying to find what the normal is and adapt to that and embrace the true individuality of yourself is when you can truly live. And for men, I think it's more difficult at times to address and talk about what's going on. We very often, generalizing here, we tend to stuff things in. We tend to not want to talk about what's taking place because very often it's viewed as being a weakness to bear your feelings and emotions. But again, it gets back to the fact that once you can embrace who you are as an individual and love and be appreciative of that person, then we can all, find our best selves. And again, you're going to hear some amazing stories tonight, some very raw stories, and I am so appreciative of the individuals that are going to be speaking. And now we're going to begin our evening of storytelling with Laura Minery with her piece, To Love and Die by Craigslist. Thank you so much.
It's strange to be writing this in bed while a human that's madly in love with me is snoring loud enough for me to hear it over Ariana Grande's K-Bye For Now Sweetener live album that is semi-blasting through my very much not AirPods. But that's my life, and frankly, it's a life I never thought I'd get to have and regularly believe that I do not deserve. We met through the most unlikely internet medium for lasting, loving relationships, the now defunct Craigslist personal section. We bonded instantly over a shared love of kitties, snuggling, comic books, and generally being silly goobers. But 2 weeks after I met my little bear Dan, I had my first panic attack, which quickly devolved into a mental health crisis that I would spend the next 10 years and counting managing. We learned years later that my primary diagnosis was health obsessional obsessive compulsive disorder, or HOOCD. In a previous time, HOOCD was hypochondria, an obsessive compulsive thinking pattern centered around the belief that you have a terminal illness or are imminently dying, regardless of what numerous medical professionals, diagnostic testing, emergency room visits, therapists, loved ones, and common sense is telling you. Straight up, this is my life, a persistent fear that no matter what I do or am doing, I am dying right now or 2 seconds from now. For me, it has taken various forms. My obsessions have centered around strokes, heart attacks, and a veritable cornucopia of terminal illnesses. It's intense and also horribly embarrassing. How do you explain to any rational person that you're facing impending doom despite no tangible evidence to support your thesis? The simple answer, you can't. I don't think there's any real way at this point for me to quantify the amount of time and money I've spent on emergency room visits, specialist visits, primary care visits, and visits to website after website that never gave me the information I needed. I've lost multiple jobs because I simply couldn't bring myself to go into work only to die there. I needed the emergency room. I needed to see another specialist, get another test, monitor my vital signs all day long in case of the slightest change. I needed to make sure I was never more than a step away from Dan in case something happened. And I cannot begin to tell you what a patient and loving person my bear truly is. The moment I knew for sure that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him was about 4 years into our relationship, and it was the night before I was about to start a job and get health insurance. Like so many nights, I was having chest pain and collapsed into myself sobbing and knowing that I was about to die. We weighed the pros and cons of an ER visit without insurance, and as he has done so many times, he drove me to the emergency room. When we arrived, he asked me if I wanted to go right in or sit on the curb a bit and wait and see if it passed. And so we sat. He held my hand, told me stories, and made me laugh the way only he can do. And 2 hours later, he helped me up off that curb, and we drove home and went to bed. And that was it. I knew he was my person, my true love, my little bear. And 2 months later, we married privately on our 4-year anniversary. And so time went on. I had some ups and many downs, but through it all, we loved, and we loved deeply. I spent the next 3 years spinning my wheels, jumping from job to job, countless medical visits, depression, obsession, repeat. I sincerely appreciate everything he did for me in those years. He supported us 100%, financially, emotionally, and physically. I was broken and utterly incapable of returning any level of coming through for the one I love. In 2017, we were blindsided by a text from Dan's mom. At ER, having CAT scan, being admitted, talk soon. We were at home watching Star Trek, obviously Next Gen. When we were finally able to talk with her, she told us that the doctors in the emergency room, one I had visited dozens of times, told her they would know more in the morning, but that it was serious. Dan was working full-time at a new job to support us. A great job, one that was changing our lives. His sister lives out of state, and his mom didn't really have any other family nearby. So first thing in the morning, I had 2 panic attacks, pulled myself together, and went to the 10th floor of the hospital. We learned that she had stage 4 cancer that had metastasized to her liver. And wow, so much information to process when someone gets a diagnosis like that. Oncologists, radiologists, surgeons, attending physicians, nurses, medical students. Later that evening, I had to pick Dan up from work and tell him his mother was dying. And I knew I was going to come through for him. Knew in the truest sense that this is what you do when you love a person as much as I love him. Love them so much you're going to face your deepest fears. The first week was a lot for me, and the first time I'd spent every day in a hospital for reasons other than my anxiety. She was still impatient, and it was a lot more information gathering and procedures. And when my mother-in-law was released that weekend, I picked her up and drove her home, and she told me, I'm going to beat this, and I knew she was wrong. Over the next 4 weeks, I spent all but 2 days by her side. Steely-eyed, I waited in those awful chairs while she did radiation every other day. I took her for her outpatient procedure to get her chemo port installed as if she were nothing more than a computer, and the next day, I took her to her first treatment. I got to know her better than I ever had. She told me stories about getting high in college, about her dreams of one day teaching yoga to cancer patients, about my baby bear, and how much she still had to live for. And I held it together. She was just so incredibly sick by the time she was diagnosed that there was basically no chance she was going to survive. The chemo blew her away. She wouldn't eat or drink for a week, could barely breathe or move, and about 4 days after she finished her first treatment, she was admitted back into the hospital and never left. In that final week, she was so far away from us and got sicker every single day. I wiped her face with cool washcloths after she vomited coffee grounds all over herself. I combed her hair, I helped clean her and adjust her body to try and achieve a state of fleeting comfort. I advocated for her, I absorbed all the information. And it was as ugly as I always knew death would be. In those last days, she liked it when we played Spotify's Spring Symphony Station while she faded in and out of consciousness. Then, almost 5 weeks to the day of her diagnosis, she went into cardiac arrest and lapsed into a coma. An hour later, we made the decision to remove her from respiratory support. While the Spring Symphony played, I held his hand and hers, cried, and over the course of 4 minutes watched my greatest fears unfold as I saw the woman who gave birth to the love of my life slowly stop breathing and die. The entire thing was a whirlwind and the most intense experience of my life. Over those 5 weeks, I stuffed all my emotions and quiet suffering as far down as they would go. When the dust settled and the emotions came boiling over, they led to prolonged, painfully dark places in the year that followed. Places darker than I'd ever been before. And yet here I am, recovering, healing, moving forward. Still challenged daily, but growing and reaching personal and professional milestones I never thought were possible. And all along that journey was still my constant, my bear. Sometimes I still ask myself why he picked me and why he continues picking me every day of our lives. He picked me because he sees me. He's always seen me, his little bug. Seen my capacity for love and potential to grow. I don't think I knew or understood the depths to which I could love until we went through this experience together. When you face your greatest fear out of fiery love for another, where do you go from there? I know now that for us, it's only up. Please welcome Grant Oland to the stage to deliver his story of recovery, but God.
So it's 2014. Mid-November, I'm shaking uncontrollably, but not because of the cold, but from my alcohol withdrawals. I'm a couple hundred feet away in Eagle Square here in Concord. I'm waiting for the church that comes out and gives food. But all I really want is a couple more bucks so I can get another beer. The church has brought teenage girls out to pray for the homeless, and they're my daughter's age, who I haven't seen in a year and a half, and my heart's crushed. I withdraw and look back at my life and how I got here. I grew up in an alcoholic home and swore I would never drink, but I was a super sensitive child, I felt. I joked I was an empath, but it wasn't a joke. It caused me severe anxiety and depression. So I ran with my addiction. I formed my life around it. I made sure jobs weren't going to drug test, that my friends used as much, if not more than me, and by 21 I was having seizures if I didn't drink every day. What once made me feel free, made me feel like a tough guy, was a prison that I created myself. After multiple detoxes, DWIs, I managed to stop drinking for a while, got married, bought a house, had a beautiful baby girl, but continued to smoke pot daily to numb myself. And then my family, my daughter, who I have to say, I'm sorry for the unhealed parts of me that in turn hurt you. It was never lack of love for you, but lack of love for myself. The marriage didn't work out. Soon after, my father died and my best friend died, and I went back to the only thing I knew that killed the pain, and that was drugs and alcohol. This left me unemployable, got evicted, living in my car, got a DWI, ended up on the streets of Laconia and Manchester, and here in Concord under the 393 bridge, and my reaching out to God was just to die. I ended up in 5-point restraints in the hospital where they knew me well. They called me a frequent flyer, but I remember that church telling me about an intensive long-term treatment facility that was in Manchester. So they put me in a cab and sent me down. Now this is half a block from where I grew up in high school, and I used to run. So I looked over my shoulders and I could see 4 of my friends' houses that I could have gone to right then and there, but I decided to leave that exactly there behind me, and I went into this program. Now my plans were to do 30 days just so I could see my daughter again, but God had other plans. I went into this program filled with guilt and shame at how I had turned my back on my daughter and my family. So my first step towards God was asking him to remove that guilt and shame, and he showed me that was what kept me in bondage. See, that the more I drank, the further I got from my family, the guiltier I felt. It was a horrible snowball. After a couple of months, I had an indescribable peace and joy, even thousands of dollars in debt. Not sure if my family was going to forgive me. or if I was going to see my daughter again. But God also showed me if I could put him first above everything, he would give me back everything shiny and new. He also showed me my sensitive spirit wasn't a liability. It was a gift that he had given me and was going to use for his glory. And after I finished the program, which I was probably voted least likely to finish, they put me in admissions. Now, I hadn't used a computer before. I didn't like talking to people, so it wasn't my first choice. But when the Lord challenges you to do something that you feel is beyond your capabilities, you have two choices: withdraw in defeat or focus on Christ and proceed in triumph. It's a matter of faith. The Lord will never call you to do something without equipping you to do it. While working there, I met an amazing woman. We were married on Valentine's Day 2020. She invited me into her family. We have a 16-year-old boy who just got his license. My daughter just got her license. And we are helping her raise our 4-year-old granddaughter. I came into this program riddled with fear, broken, ashamed. Sometimes the people God used the most are the ones that have been shattered and broken the worst, but were put back together by his grace. We hit bottom without hope and despair, but God stepped into that hopeless prison and redeemed us. He healed us, delivered us, and gave us a new identity in him. It's these stories God uses to illustrate the gospel in modern times to a new generation. It's these stories that uplift and empower others to find the same redemption in God that is offered by his grace. I truly believe that each one of these stories today is someone's survival guide out of that darkness. And I'm so grateful to be able to share mine. I'd like to share a quote of somebody else who stood on this stage and suffered with severe depression, Abraham Lincoln, who said, "When you reach the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on." Thank you. I'm going to carry up with beautiful trauma.
The medicines that help you can also hurt you. Allow me to explain. Seizures at 6 weeks old marked the beginning of my life of trade-offs and uncertainties. In and out of the hospitals and doctors' offices, just looking for answers that I would be, and wondering what the next challenge would be. All of these interventions had an aspect of trauma to my baby self, and yet hope that this time everything would be all right, that I would be like everybody else. By second grade, when I went to school with my head wired and bandaged, I knew for sure I would not be your average usual kid. Encouraged by my mom and teacher, I explained to my class that we were taking pictures of how my brain worked. They thought if I did the explaining, I would feel in more control. But all I thought was, why am I so different? The positive about this event was the neurologist helped me wrap my doll's head in bandages in attempt so I wouldn't not feel alone. Everyone's good intentions made me feel loved and cared for by the adults, but not so much my peers and classmates who didn't know what to make of me. By fourth grade, it was clear I would not be your average usual kid among my classmates. I could hardly keep up with them. With academics, social skills, and athletics, they were just too difficult for me. That one day, the teacher would ask other kids to help me. Finally, one student spoke honestly in a loud voice, "I'm tired of helping Kara, you help her." As you can imagine, I was totally humiliated and can still hear that student's voice to this day. By middle school, depression began to haunt me, and I was getting meds that just didn't seem to help. Paraprofessionals were kind and sometimes very helpful, but I was clearly the different one, not quite equal to the others. And then in high school, I began to hear voices in my head flooding me with negative suggestions. Not only was I terrified, but my parents were as well. From my birth, they had been my best advocates while suffering their own traumas, like holding me down and squirting phenobarbital into my 6-week-old screaming mouth, to feeling helpless to find solutions that would work, crying in the car after every IEP meeting. Can Kara be responsible for her own life? Should we be more strict, more laid back? What in the world will help her the most? At that time, what really helped me the most was to stay at a psychiatric adolescent unit of a nearby hospital. The folks there helped my parents and I understand the issues I was facing. A decision was made for me to attend a private boarding school for students with my disabilities, and I finally started taking meds that seemed to help. The environment with the skilled teachers and kids like me freed me to really concentrate on working on my learning disabilities and put me on a path to help me cope with the mental health issues, which will be part of me all my life. That was 15 years ago, and the lesson I have learned over time, and occasionally I still need to be reminded of it, is that for every traumatic event, there can be beauty found within. As Pink would call it, beautiful trauma. Now I want to share with you all a poem I have written that describes my own beautiful trauma. My head. My fear wakes me up inside. It just wakes me up inside. I can see right at my throat a paintbrush that drips rusty red. I think to myself, please, dear God, take me and put me out of my misery. These thoughts come from my head, These thoughts come from my head. I can see myself inside a coffin. There I lie. I hang on to the hope that loved ones would cry and cry. As I hear them sing, "Let the sun shine in," I can't help but wonder, was my decision really worthwhile? These thoughts come from my head, These thoughts come from my head. Journey down through my past, reliving my failures. I simply just wanted to fit in. And these thoughts come from my head, These thoughts come from my head. Could the little girl who was scolded for coloring outside the lines draw her own lines, paint her own pictures, and weave the threads of her life together? My own voice just grew louder. Take a chance. my ears began to hear other voices from artists and especially critical praise. Self-love takes the place of self-loathing, most of the time anyway. And now I see the same paintbrush. However, it hardly ever paints that shade of rusty red. And now I know life is worth living, 'cause I got family and friends who love me. And I am learning to love myself day after day, which is the hardest lesson of all. And these thoughts came from my head. These thoughts came from and are only in my head. Next up, here is Todd Donovan to deliver his story called Mental Health Mayday.
My story begins at the age of 8 when I attempted suicide. My parents were not aware of my suicide attempt. In the late 1970s, that wasn't something that you talked about at all, and there was really no hope for that topic. My life story does not include childhood trauma. I was never sexually assaulted. I was never abused. I come from a loving family, an intact family, and I have never had a reason to die by suicide. I do not remember why I tried to die, other than that I was furious and I just wanted to die. You see, I visualized my own suicide in my head over and over and over again. And it doesn't matter what day of the week it is, I can see my own violent suicide visually. This visualization is so graphic that it's difficult to tell whether it's real and what's not factual. The desire to accomplish this, what I see in my own mind, is so powerful and very lonely. At the age of 14, I was hiking with a friend, and we came near a 65-foot cliff. I could see my suicide in my own mind that day, but that day, for the first time in my life, I heard the voice. That voice came from the right side of my head. It was a male voice, and it was not my voice, but it sounded like a drill sergeant, and the drill sergeant said, "Do it, do it." And so I did. I obeyed the voice, and I attempted suicide under clear skies and bright sun and ended that beautiful hike. I have the physical scars and the aches and pains from fractures that overshadow that hike and the beauty of that day, but it does remind me that I survived. At the age of 18, I attempted suicide yet again. I was slowly dying, but I exhaled and I was at peace with it. I succumbed to the voice and the images, but mainly I succumbed to the voice. It was a voice that I was powerless against. It beat me down, stood over me at my weakest moments, and scolded me. The spoken word has power, doesn't it? A police officer abruptly halted my suicide attempt. He was furious at first, but his countenance just changed immediately. And all he said was, "Wow, you're having a bad day." I was hospitalized this time in a psychiatric hospital, and I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder with psychotic episodes, and placed on antidepressants and antipsychotics. The first generation of antipsychotics give me this mild facial tic that you see that I do quite a bit. And they don't bother me anymore. It's just something that I live with. I'm now 51 years old, and since around my 18th birthday, I've tried 11 different medications and many, many iterations of those medications. In 2008, I tried electroconvulsive therapy. That did not provide any relief for me. It works for some people, but it did not work for me. In fact, one of the side effects is memory loss, and I lost 3 months of memory. I was the best man at my brother's wedding, and I don't have any recollection of it. But I do remember the chocolate fondue, and I'm not sure why. One morning, my wife placed a cutout from the local newspaper. It was a story of a new treatment being offered at a local hospital called transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. TMS was a new therapy using an MRI-sized magnet over the prefrontal cortex of your brain, where mood is regulated. It sat on the refrigerator for a few months, and I finally decided that I had really nothing to lose. So helplessness fed my hopelessness, and since I had nothing to lose, I decided to go ahead and try TMS. And indeed, I was approved for it. TMS involves 36 daily treatments of that MRI-sized magnet over that prefrontal cortex, and you get 3,000 pulses over a 20-minute period. Each magnetic pulse discharge causes neurons in that area to discharge, and then the neurons next to them discharge, and then the neurons next to them discharge, and so on and so on. And eventually, you make new pathways, sort of like retraining your neurons. After my 22nd daily treatment of TMS, I woke up the following day getting ready for number 23, and that's when I discovered that I didn't have any suicidal images at all, and the voice was gone. And that was a new experience for me. I laid in bed conjuring up those suicidal images, and I could conjure them up, but as soon as I stopped conjuring them up, they went away. This was very new for me. After this remission from depression, I discovered music. Music was never a part of my life. I never listened to music growing up, even as a teenager. And after remission, the music I first heard and listened to was Eric Church, and I fell in love with his music. And so now my wife and I go to his concerts every time he comes to New England. The Fall Colors. Where have I been in New England all this time? I never saw the fall colors. The yellows and the reds were just popping. The transformation of live trees to dormant trees was the opposite of what I was experiencing. My mind was beginning to bloom, to bud, and to grow, and I discovered that I didn't want to die. I just wanted the pain to go away. I found that I could have friends and I could be a friend. I rediscovered my wife. I rediscovered my children. Now my wife and I have a new motto. It's called No Regrets. She and I traveled to New York City to see Broadway plays 4 to 5 times a year. My coworkers and I hike to remote ponds and fish them for trout, and I attend these adventures with enthusiasm. Sure, I have ups and downs, just like everybody else on the face of the earth. But my brain recognizes that the downs are not the end of the world anymore. I also continue to work with a psychologist to learn how to live without depression. I say my psychiatric nurse practitioner to help with the 2 low-dose medications that I still take. I also have 1 maintenance TMS therapy every 6 weeks, whether I need it or not. All these activities keep me super high functioning. When you see a person having a seizure, you can see the manifestation of a chemical and electrical imbalance or hindrance inside the brain. That tonic-clonic movement of the arms and legs is indicative of a seizure. It is a symptom of a larger problem going on inside that organ, the brain. When do we ever say they committed a seizure? We don't. Suicide or attempted suicide is a symptom of a much bigger problem going on inside the brain, your organ, the brain. I share my story with first responders and other audiences all over New England now. It's my way of giving back to what I've gained. And my message to everyone is very simple. If you're suffering from intrusive thoughts, from suicidal thoughts, don't give up. Treatment works. I'm living proof. So please welcome to the stage Deborah Rand reading her piece, My Illusion.
One of the key people in my life that has been steadfast in helping me is my father. He never knew about the first trauma when I was small, as I was always too fearful and confused to speak of it. He tried so hard to be there, to support me, and to distract me when my emotions were all over the place, taking me for ice cream, going jogging, and riding bikes together. He taught me a lot of helpful coping skills. He helped me to make sure my 2 daughters and I remained safe, even when I didn't feel safe. I share this now as he is dying and surely will no longer be around. It's okay though, as when you become stronger, you open yourself up to other supports, such as my husband, who has stuck with me through all of the turmoil regarding my first marriage. My story starts with looking back on a warm, sunny day when I decided that I would take a bike ride. As I neared the dam, it seemed important to sit on the wall. I sat and stared down at the dam, watching the water flow under the bridge, hitting the jagged rocks below. In that moment, I realized that my world was changing. I watched over where the water was accumulating into a deep pool, and it appeared very still and calm. I wondered if I was also changing from a center that was very much like the jagged rocks, the stormy, to a more calm and peaceful center like the pool of water. If after several decades the stormy rain that I had experienced finally ended, I realized that I no longer wanted to continue the painful, destructive path that I had led for so long. I wanted to stop the pain. I wanted to be the person that I believed I was meant to be. While sitting by the water in my stillness, I wondered what might have been different if someone believed my story. I wondered what could have been if I just believed in myself. If I just believed that I was worthy, the real me wanted to exist. I wanted to feel worthy. And yet, I knew and felt that sadness engulfed my body, grabbing me by the throat and never releasing. It left a deep hole in my forehead like a bullet that hit from a distance, a sharp left hook sinking into the depths of my stomach. Sadness was like a reaper that comes slowly seeping through the night, grabbing legs tightly, clutching one's ankles. In the increasing of my breath, the desire to end and escape was strong. Anxiety too embraced as I fell downward, smashing to the ground with a sharp bang. Yet part of me wanted to live. Did you ever feel like you were searching for something that does not exist, or something that you were born not to have, something that you were not worthy of? I have spent a long time searching for peace and happiness. I have spent a lifetime searching for the me that I so skillfully buried. I wondered if there's anyone that could believe my story. I knew my sadness was full of pain, and I had to pretend that the person I am didn't exist. I lived many years burying the inner turmoil that I felt, hoping I could just pretend that everything was okay. I sometimes wondered if I was born under some curse that needed to pay for something that was done before me. Why else would I have felt so rejected, even by myself? At 17, my emotions began to unravel, and maybe the curse took hold of my life. At this time, I worked helping the elderly. I remember sitting and reading with an elderly woman a book she requested as she no longer had sight. I had the privilege to help many make their beds each morning as they had little balance and their hands no longer worked well. I remember being always so tired and wanting just to sleep. I couldn't travel into the infirmary as the sadness and pain would overwhelm me. It was at that time I made it so those around me never really knew who I was. I made it so that I really didn't exist. In this short period of my life, it was filled with confusion and pain. I became one with the sadness. I ran from everyone. I ran from myself. I literally ran away a number of times as an adolescent and packed up and moved as an adult. I knew that I was not in the middle of a war, nor was I born of poverty, and yet I could not find happiness. My war was within myself. I tried desperately to hide a part of me that was full of trauma and pain. I was badly beaten by my first husband, and yet I knew that part of me could continue on as if there was no war, no trauma, and when the nights came, the intense internal pain would return and the war would continue forward. The trauma would leave me feeling hollow and empty inside, as if a bomb went off and took away part of me. I remember telling myself to get a grip At that time, I had 2 children that needed me. I had no time to fight this war, and so this core piece of who I was buried again deep inside of myself. I realized that I allowed several people during the day to reinforce the pain that I couldn't bury. I thought I could just carry on and bury their verbal, painful attacks. No one ever really knew of my pain or the truth of what happened those early years with the violence and cruelty of my first marriage. Yet that pain was all too real, but I was not sure that I was real. I don't believe that anyone had ever really seen me. I remember thinking, can anyone hear me? Can anyone see me? I know I don't see myself. Sadness engulfed me, and I became one with the darkness. One day I reached out and found someone that could help the sadness turn slowly into a bright light. This one person helped me to stop the circle of pain that I allowed to enter my life by using imagery. She taught me a way to make the sadness become something outside of myself that I could refuse to embrace. She taught me to develop the internal strength, and in the use of imagery, I developed the image of a Wonder Woman in my mind. Wonder Woman was my power, and I used her to tell the blob of sadness that existed deep within me that it needed to leave. Through the use of this process, the blob of sadness became smaller and smaller, where my Wonder Woman could sprinkle what was left of the blob over the mountains in my mind. This gave me the strength to move beyond the pain and the sadness. As I sat at the dam that one bright sunny day, I no longer feared being hurt again. I no longer would accept the pain. I no longer thought of the day that I endured 5 broken bones and knew that no one ever would be accountable for what happened. No one would ever know the truth of the pain that I felt, the numbness and fear. I will, though. I will always remember that I cried a billion tears. I will always remember the deep fear that I lived with and yet no one around me knew. But I will always remember that it would have been okay to let people see the pain and the intense fear. It would have been okay to allow someone to see me and understand all of my deep internal pain and sadness. As Henry David Thoreau stated, you cannot dream yourself into a character. You must hammer and forge yourself into one. I believe I have allowed myself to forge the character of who I truly am meant to be. With the support and help, you can move forward and find peace and happiness and forge your own true character. I hope and pray that sharing my story gives other victims of violence and PTSD the strength to let go of the fear and sadness and pain, and to remember that you are the one that needs to believe your story. You are worthy. I now have the pleasure to introduce Ms. Render to the stage for her essay, A Piece of Me.
Thank you, Deborah. Many people are surprised by how honest I am. This statement always makes me a little uneasy. Why not be honest? I think to myself, tell the emotion, the thought, the utter truth. Lying just prolongs the truth surfacing. This is part of my story. This is my truth. As I felt it, heard it, and remember it. This is part of me. My name is Renda. The last name doesn't matter. It never has. I wear glasses, have short brown hair, I'm about 5'2", and around 175 pounds. I've battled major depression since I was a teenager. I've been married for 6 years. Not to the man of my dreams, just to a man. We have 3 children, a girl who's 4 years old, and our boys are 2 and 1. We live in a raised ranch on a private lot with 3 dogs and a minivan. The American dream. The last year or so, my husband slept on the couch. One evening, I had enough of not sharing a bed with him. To me, it was bad enough. In 6 years, we only shared a blanket intermittently. I walked into the living room and I told him if he was not going to share a bed with me, then he should find another place to sleep. He looked at me, angry, and said, okay. He got up and slammed the door and left. I couldn't believe it. No fighting, no talking, nothing but a simple, okay, and he was out the door. We have 3 children sleeping in their rooms. I ran out onto the deck and screamed as loud as I could. I cried and I melted to the ground. For our anniversary, I was served the divorce papers. I drank glass after glass of wine while I filled them out. Of course I filled them out. My husband do paperwork? Yeah, right. I lost about 60 pounds. I began to focus on what I could. Work, school, friends, movies, and drinking. The foreclosure notice arrived. My ex-husband had stopped paying the mortgage, as was court ordered. I couldn't make sense of all this. All I could feel was failure. I was barely able to take care of myself and my children. Now I was a sitting duck, waiting for the sheriff to serve us an eviction notice. I knew I had lost our family home, and there was nothing I could do to change it. Defeated, I moved into a 3-bedroom apartment with my 3 kids and a roommate. Life quickly became very toxic. At this point, I had a boyfriend living with us. My roommate also had a boyfriend living with us. My 3 kids were sharing a small bedroom. We entertained couch surfers and had additional roommates floating in and out. I did what I could to get through the days, take care of my children, attend school full-time, and work part-time. Then the eviction notice arrived. My choices became clear. Live in my car with my 3 children, or accept the opportunity given from my mother, something I dreaded, and rent her home. I chose the latter for the sake of my children, and I felt so deeply that I had failed as an adult. We moved over Christmas. My mother gave my boyfriend and I 6 months to find jobs and cover our bills, or she would evict us. The house became haunted with ill feelings. It didn't help that my childhood home faced the home of the man who sexually abused me as a teenager. My boyfriend would yell at me constantly, telling me how bad I smelled. He would get angry at me for going out with my friends, when all he wanted to do was stay cooped up in a black hole of drugs and alcohol. His jealousy and paranoia with everything caused my insecurities to surface. I started hearing voices again, as I did when my depression set in. Not commanding voices, but background noises of voices talking, creating a paranoia in myself and validating how much I have failed in life. My kids hated me. My 2nd grader was truant, as she would physically fight with me in the mornings, not wanting to go to school. She would also tear things off the walls in fits of rage. My youngest, barely 2, cute little cherub with those chubby cheeks, would look at me and say, "I hate you, Mommy. I want Daddy." I was an empty shell, just floating through the days. My children would tell me almost daily that they didn't want to be here with me, mostly because they did want their father. He was the fun one. I was the one saddled with the week's schedule of bedtimes, homework, and all the other parenting responsibilities that arose. Their father only had them on weekends. No bedtimes, just fun and freedom. I was crying daily over everything and nothing. And late one night, after my boyfriend decided again that our relationship wouldn't last, we fought. I decided to sleep in my daughter's room, and while I was lying there, I thought how much better it would be for everyone if I were gone. My mother would be happier. My mother would be happier because she would get her house back. My kids would be happier because they would live with their father. And my boyfriend would have his life to live as he chose. It is settled. I felt at peace, knowing I could do something to help those I loved so much. This was the most considerate thing that I had control over to truly help my family. And an utter calm came over me. My boyfriend came into my daughter's room to yell at me some more. I got up calmly and started to tell him my plan. I was certain of it, tranquil even, and he became scared. He made some phone calls and then said that we were going to the hospital. I talked with a triage nurse, another nurse, a counselor, a doctor. The doctor said they would give me a choice to ride in the ambulance or to find a ride to the psych hospital. The counselor came back and said, there's no choice. I have to ride in the ambulance. I am too high risk. Once admitted into the hospital, I continued crying and sleeping for a day and a half. Finally, I got up and attended a group meeting. Then I lost myself in a drawing. People called, but they were all unsure of what to say. There were many awkward silences on the other end of the line. I was comfortable in the hospital. I could have stayed forever. When I couldn't stop the tears, I could just lie down. When I needed medications, someone would dispense them for me at scheduled times. All I had to do was stand in line. I didn't need to feel anything anymore, and being numb was safe. An abrupt phone call from my boyfriend shipped me from this dazed state I was in. I had to go home for my kids. My mother had kicked my boyfriend out of the house and taken over caring for my children, as she was getting frustrated. So after my discharge, I tried to keep my bearings as I returned to a life that I mentally left. My relationship ended. I started therapy again, weekly or twice a week when I needed it. I was able to talk with 4 close friends who became my support. I gave them all copies of my wellness recovery action plan. I also wanted to connect with people who struggle like me. I've become active in the Out of the Darkness walks, raising money for awareness and prevention. My children became my priority and my lifeline. I still cry many times a week. We found a code name for this, a moment, and they learned to ask if there was a reason why I was crying, or if it was just a moment that Mama needed to get through. We have a wonderful relationship now. This all happened in 2010. Since then, I have been seeing a therapist regularly. I work with my doctors who manage my medications. I work with therapists to learn different coping skills. And I've done many outpatient programs to understand more about how to manage my depression and suicidal ideations. I've had 2 more hospitalizations in the past 10 years. But each time I spiral, I try to learn from it. I use my schooling as a fine artist to convey emotions into visual works of art. And I recently rediscovered my love of performing in live theater, which brought me here. I also try to share my experiences so that others who are struggling like me know they're not alone. Thank you. And now, introducing Japhet Chalker to share his story of the beauty in breaking open.
The first time I screamed I wanted to die, I was 6 years old. I was fractured. The second time I screamed I wanted to die, I was 16 years old. I was serious, too serious. When my mother died, I was 17 years old. I didn't want to die anymore. I knew I had to live, but I didn't really want to either. I had cracked. But like a broken windshield I didn't have the money to replace, I held it together. Over the course of the next 5 years, I attempted to piece myself together. I succeeded into breaking into finer fragments. I became someone different, someone I thought everyone around me wanted me to be. When I took out the trash, I saw this dumpster, backlit by this sunset. I was 21 years old. This skyline, this sunset, it broke me open, then put me back together. Something clunked into place in my thoughts. I began to write. I love life. Everything about it interests me. Every little thing is a puzzle that I care about solving. Everything I don't understand, I want to observe more. I find it interesting that I think of most of my ideas while driving. I find it interesting that I drive my mom's old car, but I didn't have to pay any money for it. But I wouldn't be driving it if she hadn't died. So what did I really pay? It sounds sad, but I find it interesting that it's not. It's not happy, but it is interesting. I find it interesting that as I write this, I'm sitting in a mess of my own making. There are clothes strewn about that I haven't picked up, papers I haven't gone through, adulting I have not yet done. Yet isn't it interesting that I'm okay? I'm as happy as can be writing this out. I said, screw it, and I wouldn't do anything else until I wrote this down. Speaking of being down, at the time of writing, I was recently broken up with. I hate myself for losing myself in her, sacrificing my well-being just to be with her, not taking care of myself at all. I'd rather be with someone else and distracted from it all. I know that I miss her still, but I don't. I feel more freer now than I ever thought I would be. I'm not happier, but I am more free, more able to see that life is interesting. See, I lost myself loving her, then I lost myself in myself. But I need to learn to love myself even more than I ever loved her. See, my value, my worth, is so not defined by how anyone else sees it. Isn't it interesting how life is full of these ups and downs, but everything is always so fascinating? Isn't it interesting that we love? Isn't it interesting that we hate? It is interesting that we are even alive to do either of those things, that we have the time to concern ourselves with other people, that I could sacrifice myself so much for someone else and see no evil. That is extraordinarily interesting to me because there is hope in only that one fact, even if the love I gave to her I might never get back. I gave it. Therefore it exists. Since I know without any doubt that that powerful of love exists in me, I can know that it exists in other people. Isn't it interesting that I think it exists in everyone, even though it might not? I have hope that it is only something that's been forgot. My brain thinks in rhymes. Isn't that weird? Weird is another word for interesting, only more off-putting. We don't understand something or someone and we call them weird, when really we mean that we don't understand them yet. They're more interesting than we can fathom. We fear what we cannot understand, so we only understand what we can. We need to understand what we fear, so we can understand more than we ever dreamed we could. I heard of this tradition from Japan that when something ceramic breaks, they repair it with gold, something we have given value to over all else. Now close your eyes. Imagine every crack and break you have, every scar you've gained over the years, every anxiety attack, every breakdown being filled in with gold. It is apparent you are broken, but now you glimmer like no other, because no flaw in one person is like a flaw in any other. Now imagine that instead of gold, it is filled with something of true value, filled with passion, with love, with interest, with insight, with the words that could help someone else in their own personal fight. Imagine that because of your flaws, you get to be the light in someone else's life. You are uniquely broken pieces. You are one of a kind. You have a unique mind with unique ideas, thoughts, dreams. Never look at someone or something and think you see everything it seems to be. Isn't this all interesting? I love life. There are so many things that I do not understand. There are so many things I probably never will. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that exciting? It means I get to talk to other people, express my ideas, listen to theirs, grow as a person. I love life. Not enough people talk about the important things. Almost everyone seems to think about them. Not enough people say anything. The ones that do are often misunderstood, as I'm sure I will be as I start to speak my mind, but there is no chance in hell that I will ever stop, because I love life. There are so many things that are interesting that I have not written about here. This is a puzzle I haven't solved yet. I don't think I ever will. I'm so excited that for the rest of my life I get to break over and over, then repair the pieces with sunlight. That is so absolutely amazing to me, so absolutely interesting. Maybe this is nothing but the ramblings of someone who thinks they see the world for what it could be. This is writing that will never be finished, and as beautiful as it was unrefined, I'll continue to refine it, because life is about being consistently happy and constant refinement. Isn't it interesting that what it took was a sunset and some trash for me to finally fall in love with the fact that I am alive, that I am here for just now, and that I am going to die. Someday I'll perish just like everyone else. So I'm going to leave behind everything that I can. When I decided to step out from behind the curtain of my fear, self-doubt, and anxiety, when I decided to step on stage, I was 25 years old. That happens to be today. Thank you for this opportunity to break in a new way. Next up, it is my honor to introduce Layne to discuss her piece, Power to Heal.
My painful prison sentence led me to my power, peace, passion, and purpose. I was rocking uncontrollably from the fire that had burned a hole in my chest where my heart once was, that had been thrown to the ground and stomped on as if it were just a used cigarette butt. My pillow was a mascara massacre. I was shaking from the withdrawals to my addiction to people, a love addiction, and toxic relationships were my drug. I was desperate for a lifeline, someone to come and save me and rescue me from the fire. Anything something to make me feel better because I did not know how on my own. My divorce was a brutal battleground. It was filled with fighting and blaming and manipulation and alienation, with our 3 kids just being tossed around like ping pong balls and used as pawns in a game I was no longer willing to play. I was starving for just an ounce of empathy, yet intoxicated with fear, doubt, worry, anxiety, have-dos, can'ts. Life was turned upside down and inside out. Sorries were falling from my pockets, and I was shoulding all over myself. That anxiety had pushed me out the door to run for release, where I ran right into a new relationship. Oh, but he was the one. That love I had desperately been craving. My heart was overflowing with love until his alcohol became a priority, even over picking my children and myself up the day of my grandmother's funeral. The day I had to bury my rock. Not only was I a train wreck, I had hit rock bottom, and I didn't even drink until the time that I did. Where am I? The ceiling is spinning. This isn't even my ceiling. Oh my goodness. Am I ever going to see my children again? My whole body was warning me about the danger. My heart and gut were screaming at me. But there was nowhere to run. It was dark. I couldn't drive. No, no, I screamed. I don't think you heard me. No. I thrashed, I screamed, no, you are hurting me. The rape didn't last long. Well, at least not as long as the STD. I was broken open. I had only a high school diploma and 3 children to support. I was a stressed and overwhelmed single mom. I felt so knocked down by life, by divorce, by death, and disease. Literally knocked down to my knees, where I was scrubbing the floors of 27 homes on my own. I would clean anything, including this 2,500 square foot so-called home that was used as a toilet for 15 cats and caged birds. So not only was I cleaning up my own crap, but I was sobbing as I was cleaning up the crap of others. I couldn't keep up with the legal fees from the divorce that had truly earned the title of war. My 800 credit score came crashing down with me as I filed bankruptcy. I was stuck in my victim story that everything was happening to me. All the emotional and physical pains and diseases, they were messages. They were talking to me to wake me up, but I was not listening. I didn't even know who the real me was. I was buried beneath society's broken programming, blind spots, past pains, and traumas. And when I was stressed and anxious, I didn't feel safe to say no or to just be. I was constantly doing and doing for others. Self-care and self-love, they felt selfish. I honestly didn't even know what they were. Never mind know that they were essential. And they're essential because that stress causes the breakdown in our health and our relationships. So I ran through that pain into the woods, away from only focusing on others, and into myself to reclaim my power. When we can be alone, we can be with others without using them as a means of escape. And until I learned to heal and love myself, I was attracting more wounded energy to me and bleeding all over others who didn't even cut me. So I went from 0 to hero. I was depressed on the couch to running 5Ks and 10Ks, and half marathons later, I was in the valley of the Grand Canyon 24-mile rim-to-rim run, and that can't word surfaced again. And my running partner said, Sonia, you have 12 miles up or you have 12 miles up. Pick one. The pain is inevitable. However, we always have choices, and we must choose our pain. To numb, suppress, avoid, resist, and fight, or to breathe and go through the journey from our head to our heart and soul, one step at a time. I've run marathons and ultramarathons, a 53-mile run. I'm now a certified yoga teacher, and I'm so passionate about living on purpose to serve others on their healing journey to their heart and soul. So just as self-love and care are essential, so are a couple of F words: fear and forgiveness. Now, if you're like I was, forgiving was unfathomable. Are you crazy? Forgive someone that caused me and my children so much pain? But that forgiveness is for us. It does not mean tolerating emotional, physical, verbal abusive behaviors. It means allowing yourself to heal and free yourself from that cage. And that forgiveness may start with forgiving yourself. When we forgive, we reclaim our power rather than giving it away. And when we speak to ourselves or others through that criticism, we end up in that prison like a caged bird. When we open our mind from blaming ourselves, our loved ones, the government, we step into nature and face our fears, and our healing journey begins. It starts with you, and your adventure awaits. Children don't do as we say, they do as they see. And now my home is a peaceful, safe haven, and the relationships with my children are calm, compassionate, and full of unconditional love and presence. That prison sentence was in my mind. My mind was crazy, but I was not. I was the only one who held the key to escape and free myself. We are all heroes on our healing journey, and our mind truly is our medicine. And you are more powerful than you think. So we're multidimensional beings, and it takes more than focusing on just our physical body and others. It requires whole mind, body, spirit healing. We are spiritual beings having a human experience after all. I spent over a decade researching and training and educating myself in the most gentle, cutting-edge healing modalities, intervention, and coaching techniques to create Living Unbroken, a trauma and healing-based personal development process that gets to the heart of the matter fast. You don't have to wait for all this adversity, crisis, death, or disease to learn and develop resiliency, to reclaim your power and stay in that healing power. We all have power and purpose, even when it feels too dark to access your inner light. And with strong wings, the sky is limitless for you to free yourself and take your life, your health and relationships to new heights. You are not broken. It is just broken programming, and it's time you begin thriving that way. I believe in you. You are loved and you are worthy and never alone. It is your divine birthright to thrive in the high country. Love, light, and healing. Namaste. Now I'd like to introduce Beth Stark to close out This Is My Brave, New Hampshire, 2021.
Good evening, everyone. How about another round of applause for all of these amazing and brave storytellers? All right. So my name is Beth Stark, and I was lucky enough to participate in the 2019 This Is My Brave Conquer New Hampshire show. To all of the storytellers, welcome to the family. I hope you all feel empowered, brave, authentic, and courageous. This Is My Brave is an organization that is changing lives and improving the narrative surrounding mental health and addiction. I hope you carry your bravery, I'm gonna cry, out into this world, and we all continue to break the stigma and spread awareness of mental health and addiction. I love This Is My Brave. I would love to share a little bit about what This Is My Brave has done for me. I found This Is My Brave in one of the darkest times of my life. I was searching for a place where I would fit in and be welcomed as a mom that had a mental health diagnosis and battled substance abuse issues. I never could have imagined how amazing the outcome would be. Since sharing my story, and I need to mention the love and acceptance I felt by sharing, I have graduated college with high honors and begun a part-time MSW program at Simmons University in Boston. Please keep in mind, I was always told that my mental health would hold me back and I would never be able to handle college. I have been given the opportunity to share my story on podcasts, radio shows, and my essay is being published in the Massachusetts Family Court Handbook for Judges, Lawyers, and Probation Officers as a way to show the power of change and hope. But the biggest gift has been freeing myself from shame and allowing others to see what my life was really like and how I grew resilient and brave. I would also be remiss not to mention my son, Philip. My son is almost 6, and he is always watching. We are almost 3 years into full joint custody, and he is just Philip. He is compassionate, he is kind and empathetic. Philip is my why, This Is My Brave is my how. I will never take for granted the chance to share my story and break stigma. In my late 30s, I was unwell, I lost it all, and I found my way back. My back was full of love, support, kindness. You know where that started? This is my brave. I hope all of the storytellers take this gift and keep on talking. Never stop talking. We are the change we want to see in this world, and we have worked towards breaking the shame and the stigma that can surround mental health and addiction. By standing here today, you've owned your story and you've made it yours. You've controlled the narrative and you've made it your story. My story is mine, but maybe it can help someone. I know that many other stories helped me. This is my brave freed me from shame, guilt, and sadness. Today I hold my head high, I acknowledge my strengths, I still ugly cry in bathrooms, and I continue on. You know what has changed in me? I know I'm worthy of my spot on this planet, and I know I'm needed. We are all needed and important. This is my brave gave me this gift, and I hope it also gives you the same gifts. Thank you all for coming to our show. Thank you to Karen, Ellen, Rebecca, and Megan. And please remember, we all know someone who struggles with mental health, and you are not alone. Have a great night.
I thought there was no way out. Yeah, I used to be scared of the light, and I was swallowed by doubt. I'd forgotten what freedom was like. Puzzle pieces on the floor, they don't fit in anymore. I'm changing, I'm changing. When they ask you who I am, what I've done and where I've been, there's one thing I want you to say. Tell 'em I'm brave, see it on my face. I am bigger than anything coming my way. It's a new day, now I'm not afraid. So if anyone asks you how I overcame, you can tell